A black judge is told to get lost by two white security guards as she tries to enter the courthouse she's been assigned to. They mock her, humiliate her, and send her away like she doesn't belong. But just 2 minutes later, she returns, robed, calm, and with the power to shut down the entire court. What did she see behind those doors? And why is she risking everything to expose what's been hidden for years? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The fog hung thick and heavy over East Briar as Judge Nia Walker's sedan wound its way through the sleeping town. The dashboard clock read 5:47 a.m., its green numbers casting a soft glow in the dark interior. Her GPS chirped directions in a cheerful voice that felt out of place in the gray morning. "In 500 feet, turn right onto Maple Street," the device announced. Nia's hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, her dark eyes scanning the empty streets. Old brick buildings lined the road, their windows still dark. A few early risers hustled between the local diner and their cars, coffee cups clutched in their hands like lifelines. The rental house appeared through the mist, a modest single story with white siding and navy shutters. Nothing fancy, nothing memorable. Perfect for someone who needed to blend in. Nia pulled into the driveway and cut the engine, sitting for a moment in the silence. She reached for her purse and pulled out a small key ring, then gathered her coat around her shoulders and stepped out into the damp morning air. The gravel crunched under her sensible shoes as she made her way to the trunk, where 3 carefully packed suitcases waited. The house key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the air was still and carried the faint scent of cleaning products. Nia methodically brought in her bags, closing the door softly behind her each time. The neighborhood was still quiet, but she didn't want to draw attention. In the master bedroom, she unpacked with precise movements. Clothes went into drawers and the closet. Toiletries lined up neatly in the bathroom. The last items she removed were 2 framed photographs, wrapped carefully in soft cloth. Nia's fingers lingered on the first photo as she placed it on the nightstand, her parents on their 40th wedding anniversary, both beaming at the camera. Her mother's silver hair caught the light, and her father's laugh lines were deep and genuine. The second frame held a different kind of memory. Jamal, her younger brother, in his college graduation gown. His smile was bright and hopeful, before everything changed, before the arrest, before the silence between them grew into something heavy and painful. She touched the edge of Jamal's frame gently, then turned away. There would be time for memories later. Right now, she had work to do. In the small home office, Nia changed out of her travel clothes. The tailored judge's attire stayed in its garment bag. Instead, she pulled on simple black slacks and a gray sweater. Clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Clothes that would let her blend into the background of the courthouse. From her briefcase, she retrieved a thick manila folder. The label read EBC Courthouse Internal Audit in neat block letters. Inside, smaller folders were organized with tabs. Probation manipulation. Security misconduct, sentencing disparities, each one filled with preliminary data that had triggered this investigation. Nia spread the papers across the desk, her eyes scanning familiar statistics. The numbers told a story of justice applied unevenly, of patterns too consistent to be coincidence. But numbers weren't enough. She needed to see it firsthand. Needed to document the daily reality of how East Briar Courthouse treated people of color. At exactly 7:15 a.m., Nia's car pulled into the staff parking lot of East Briar Courthouse. The fog had lifted somewhat, revealing a stark stone building with columns that seemed to loom over the square. She gathered her briefcase, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The employee entrance was around the back, a plain metal door with a card reader. As she approached, 2 security guards stationed by the door straightened up, their casual conversation stopping abruptly. The older one, Dennis according to his nameplate, looked her up and down with undisguised disdain. His partner, Mark, shifted his weight and crossed his arms, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Can we help you?" Dennis's voice dripped with false politeness. "Public entrance is around front, sweetheart." Nia kept her expression neutral as she reached into her pocket for her credentials. "I'm here for an administrative review." Her voice was calm and measured as she held out her ID. "I have clearance for all areas of the building." Dennis barely glanced at the credentials before letting out a sharp laugh. "Administrative review? That's cute." He exchanged looks with Mark. "Listen, sweetheart, why don't you take yourself back to wherever you came from before we have to escort you out?" Mark had already pulled out his phone, pointing it at Nia. The camera clicked, and his thumbs moved quickly across the screen. "Adding to the watch list," he said with a grin, not bothering to lower his voice. Nia saw the group chat name flash across his screen, "Watch list," as he sent the photo. She committed it to memory, along with their faces, their names, their badges. Every detail would go into her report. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps steady and unhurried. She could feel their eyes on her back, could hear their muffled laughter. But she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Their reaction had already told her more than they realized about what was wrong at East Briar Courthouse. Nia walked steadily back to her car, her heels clicking softly against the asphalt. The morning air had grown warmer, but she barely noticed. Her mind was already processing, categorizing, analyzing the encounter that had just transpired. Inside her vehicle, she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. The digital clock on her dashboard blinked 7:22 a.m. Through the windshield, she could see Dennis and Mark still at their post, occasionally glancing in her direction and chuckling. Taking a deep breath, she closed her eyes for a moment. The practiced calm she'd cultivated over years on the bench settled over her like a familiar cloak. When she opened her eyes again, they were sharp and focused. Nia reached for her phone, her movements deliberate and precise. From a hidden folder, she pulled up a contact simply labeled Audit Node. Her fingers tapped in a complex sequence of numbers before the call connected. "Security verification required," a computerized voice stated. "Judge Walker, authorization code Delta 794 Echo," she spoke clearly. "Timestamp 7:23 a.m., East Briar location." There was a pause, then a human voice came on the line. "Verified, Judge Walker. Status report?" "Early activation required," Nia said, her voice professional and measured. "Initial covert observation compromised within first hour. Security personnel exhibited explicit discriminatory behavior, documented misconduct through unauthorized photography, and maintained a surveillance database labeled Watch List." She recounted the encounter in precise detail, noting names, times, and exact quotes. The line went quiet for a moment. "Understood. Please hold for Oversight Committee assessment." Nia waited patiently, watching as more cars began pulling into the parking lot. Early morning staff, clerks, attorneys, courthouse workers hurried toward the building, travel mugs in hand, briefcases swinging. "Judge Walker," a new voice came on the line, older and carrying the weight of authority. "The committee has reviewed your report. Given the immediate documented violation of multiple protocols, we're granting authorization for full visible intervention. Code Level Alpha. You have complete operational authority to proceed with public review." "Acknowledged," Nia responded. "Initiating visible phase now." She ended the call and turned to look at her trunk. Inside, carefully packed away, was everything she needed for this moment. Everything she'd hoped she wouldn't need so soon. Stepping out of her car, Nia opened the trunk and lifted out a garment bag. The black judicial robe inside was pristine, its fabric heavy with both physical and symbolic weight. She slipped it on with practiced ease, the familiar sensation of the material settling across her shoulders bringing a sense of purpose. From her briefcase, she retrieved her judge's credentials, not the administrative ones she'd shown earlier, but her full judicial identification. The gold badge caught the morning light as she clipped it to her robe. She changed from her practical flats into classic black heels, adding inches to her height. Each movement was calm, unhurried, yet filled with intention. The transformation from anonymous auditor to federal judge was complete. The courthouse's main entrance stood at the top of a broad set of stone steps. Staff members were filing in through the heavy wooden doors, many of them already absorbed in their phones or morning conversations. None of them noticed the robed figure approaching from the parking lot. At precisely 7:30 a.m., the courthouse officially opened to the public. The lobby began to fill with the usual morning crowd, attorneys checking their watches, clients clutching manila envelopes, clerks hurrying to their stations. Nia walked through the main doors, her heels striking the marble floor with authority. The sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling of the main hall. A few heads turned, then more. The steady stream of morning conversation began to falter. She moved purposefully toward the security desk where a microphone connected to the building's PA system sat. The guard behind the desk, not Dennis or Mark, stared at her in confusion as she approached. "Ma'am, you can't," he began, but fell silent as she held up her judicial badge. "Federal Judge Nia Walker," she stated, her voice carrying across the now quieting lobby. "I need the PA system." The guard's eyes widened as he read her credentials. His hand shook slightly as he pushed the microphone toward her. Nia picked up the microphone, pressed the broadcast button, and spoke. Her voice rang out through every corner of the building, clear and commanding. "Attention all East Briar Courthouse personnel and visitors. This is Federal Judge Nia Walker. Effective immediately, all court activities are suspended. This facility is under administrative review for systemic racial misconduct." The effect was immediate. The lobby fell into shocked silence, then erupted into confused whispers. A clerk dropped a stack of files, papers scattering across the floor. Several attorneys pulled out their phones, frantically typing or making calls. Through the growing chaos, Nia continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "All judicial staff are to report to the main chambers immediately. Security personnel will remain at their posts pending individual review. Court clerks, please secure your stations and await further instructions." From the corner of her eye, she saw Dennis and Mark emerge from a side door, their earlier smugness replaced by pale uncertainty. Near the elevators, a group of local judges had frozen in place, their morning conversations forgotten as they stared at the source of the announcement. The whispers grew louder, spreading through the building like wildfire. "Federal Judge, administrative review, suspended." The words bounced off the marble walls, creating a symphony of confusion and disbelief. Staff members moved in uncertain patterns, some hurrying to comply with the orders, others standing rooted in place. Attorneys gathered in small clusters, speaking in urgent undertones. The usual morning routine of the courthouse had shattered, replaced by a stunned paralysis. The local judges moved as a group toward their chambers, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and fear. Security guards stood at their posts, rigid and uncertain, their usual authority diminished in the face of federal intervention. Within minutes, the bustling courthouse had transformed. The normal sounds of judicial business, shuffling papers, clicking heels, legal discussions, faded into a heavy silence. The weight of what was happening settled over the building like a thick blanket, muffling even the whispers. Nia stood in the center of it all, a calm eye in the storm of reaction. Her robe draped perfectly around her, her posture straight and dignified. She surveyed the scene with steady eyes, watching as her words continued to ripple through the courthouse, changing everything in their wake. In the dim security office, Dennis and Mark hunched over the surveillance monitors, their morning coffee cups still steaming beside them. The screens showed different angles of the courthouse, familiar views they'd watched for years. "Man, you should have seen her face when we sent her packing," Dennis chuckled, rewinding the footage from earlier. "These people think they can just walk in here like they own the place." Mark nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Got her picture right here." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through the watch list group chat, added it to the collection. The security feed switched to a new angle showing the main lobby. Dennis's laugh caught in his throat. There, striding across the marble floor in full judicial robes, was the same woman they'd dismissed earlier. "What the hell?" Mark sat up straight, coffee forgotten. They watched as she approached the security desk, her credentials clearly visible even on the grainy footage. Dennis's face drained of color as the woman picked up the PA microphone. Even through the surveillance system's tinny speakers, her voice rang with unmistakable authority. "Federal Judge Nia Walker." "Federal Judge?" Mark's voice cracked. He frantically pulled up his phone, staring at the photo he'd taken earlier. "You said she was just some activist trying to cause trouble." Dennis stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Delete it," he hissed. "Delete that picture right now." But Mark's trembling fingers couldn't move fast enough. His phone screen lit up with a new message. "Attention all staff. By order of the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee, all electronic devices and communications are now subject to immediate review." Throughout the courthouse, similar messages were appearing on screens and phones. In the judge's chambers, computers pinged with urgent emails marked "Immediate Action Required." The messages detailed the suspension of all court proceedings and demanded unrestricted access to internal communication systems. Judge Alton Myers stood in his chambers, his face reddening as he read the directive. With 30 years on the bench, he'd never seen anything like this. He reached for his phone, dialing a familiar number at the State Judicial Board. "This is completely unauthorized," he barked into the phone. "I don't care what credentials she has. You can't just shut down an entire courthouse." He listened for a moment, his expression darkening. "What do you mean it's already been approved?" "By whom?" As he argued, his computer screen suddenly went dark, then displayed a simple message. "Network lockdown initiated." His phone call dropped mid-sentence. In a quiet corner of the third-floor hallway, Alicia Mensa watched the unfolding chaos with keen interest. She'd been at her intern desk when Judge Walker made her announcement, and immediately recognized her as the woman she'd seen Dennis and Mark harassing earlier. Alicia's phone buzzed. She'd been secretly added to several courthouse group chats months ago, not because they wanted her there, but because someone had mistakenly included her in a mass ad. She'd stayed quiet, watching and documenting everything she saw. Now she opened the watch list chat, her heart racing as she saw Mark's latest post, the photo of Judge Walker with a crude caption beneath it. Working quickly and quietly, Alicia began downloading the chat history. Months of messages, photos, and jokes about black attorneys, defendants, and courthouse visitors filled her screen. Her hands were steady as she saved everything to a secure folder. 3 months of internship had taught her to keep her head down, but it had also shown her exactly where to look for evidence of systemic problems. Meanwhile, in her newly assigned chambers, Judge Nia Walker sat alone at her desk. The room was austere. She hadn't bothered to unpack any personal items yet. The only sound was the gentle hum of the building's air conditioning and the distant murmur of confused voices in the hallway. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. "Come in," she called, her voice calm and measured. A young courier entered holding a sealed envelope marked with the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee's official stamp. "Priority delivery for Judge Walker," he said, placing it carefully on her desk before quickly departing. Nia opened the envelope with precise movements. Inside was a single USB drive, labeled in stark black letters, EBC Guardroom, Archived Group Chat Logs. She plugged the drive into her laptop, and the screen immediately filled with files. As she opened them, a flood of images and messages appeared. Hundreds of photos of black attorneys, defendants, and courthouse visitors, each accompanied by racial slurs and mocking captions. The timestamps stretched back months, years even. Some faces she recognized, respected colleagues who'd appeared in East Briar Courthouse for various cases. Others were ordinary citizens, photographed without their knowledge or consent while simply trying to navigate the justice system. At the bottom of the screen, the most recent message appeared, posted just hours ago. "If she comes back, she'll be on the list too." Nia closed the laptop screen with a gentle click. Her face remained composed, the same calm expression she'd worn throughout her career. But in her eyes, a fire burned, not of anger or vengeance, but of pure, unwavering determination. The evidence she'd been sent to find had revealed itself faster than expected, and it was more extensive than even she had anticipated. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, as Nia sat on a weathered park bench across from the courthouse. Yellow leaves drifted down around her, creating a natural carpet at her feet. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold as she studied the secure tablet in her hands, methodically reviewing case files from East Briar's archives. The screen's soft blue light illuminated her face as she scrolled through endless names and dates. Her expression remained neutral, practiced from years on the bench, but her fingers moved with purpose across the glass surface. Each file told a story: bail amounts, sentencing patterns, demographic data that painted a clear picture of systemic bias. Suddenly, her finger froze mid-swipe. There, among thousands of cases, was a name that made her heart stop. Jamal Walker. She blinked hard, as if the name might disappear, but it remained. 15 years ago, her brother had been arrested in East Briar. The charge seemed minor, disorderly conduct, but the sentence was harsh. 6 months in county jail. Her throat tightened as she swiped to the next page, revealing the presiding judge's name. Alton Myers. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Her brother's case wasn't just another file. It was part of the pattern she'd been sent to investigate. With steady hands that betrayed none of her inner turmoil, she opened her phone and dialed a local civil rights attorney's office, requesting an urgent confidential meeting. An hour later, she sat in a small coffee shop several blocks from the courthouse. The bell above the door chimed, and Nia looked up. Her carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment as she recognized the man who entered. Jamal, her brother, 15 years older than when she'd last seen him. Time had hardened him. His face was leaner, his eyes carried a weight she didn't remember, and gray peppered his temples. He wore a well-cut suit now, but his movements still held the careful alertness of someone who'd learned to watch his back. Jamal spotted her and stopped short. Recognition, surprise, and something darker flashed across his face. He approached slowly, his leather briefcase gripped tight in one hand. "Nia." His voice was cool, professional. "I didn't know you were in town." "Jamal." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Please, sit." He remained standing. "Why am I here? My office said a federal judge needed to meet about East Briar cases. They didn't mention it was you." "Because I didn't tell them." Nia met his gaze steadily. "I'm conducting a federal audit of the courthouse. This morning I found your case in their records." Jamal's laugh was sharp and without humor. "Now you care about my case? 15 years later?" He finally sat, but his posture remained rigid. "Where were you when I needed you, when I was sitting in that cell? You were too busy becoming one of them to stand up for your own brother." "I never stopped caring," Nia said quietly. "But I made a choice to fight the system from the inside. Your case, it's not isolated. Judge Myers has a pattern of excessive sentencing for minor offenses, particularly with black defendants. Your arrest is part of the evidence I'm gathering." Across town, in a modern apartment complex, Samantha Hargrove sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at her phone in disbelief. The headline seemed to pulse on her screen. "Black judge suspends East Briar court over racism claims." Her father's name appeared several paragraphs down, listed among the security personnel under investigation. Her thumb trembled as she opened her email. As Judge Myers' clerk, she had access to internal courthouse communications. A new message thread caught her eye. Her father had been copied on it by mistake. The email contained casual mockery of another guard who had led a black teen through security without extra screening. Samantha's stomach churned as she read her father's response, full of cruel jokes and racist implications. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. This was the man who had taught her about justice, who had proudly watched her graduate law school, who had helped her secure her clerkship. But now she saw him clearly for the first time, and the image made her sick. Later that evening, as darkness settled over East Briar, Nia returned to her rental house. The porch light cast long shadows across the front walk as she approached the door. Something white caught her eye. An envelope slipped under the door onto the welcome mat. Inside her house, Nia opened the envelope with careful fingers. 2 photographs slid out onto her kitchen counter. The first showed her face clearly as she entered the courthouse that morning, captured from an angle that suggested it wasn't from official security cameras. The second displayed her car parked behind the building, the license plate clearly visible. There was no note, no message, just the implied threat of surveillance. Nia's eyes narrowed as she studied the photos. Then, moving with deliberate calm, she walked to the living room lamp and unscrewed the base. There, nestled in the metal housing, was a tiny black tracking device, its red light blinking steadily. She held the bug in her palm, understanding washing over her. The house she'd rented under an alias was compromised. Someone had been watching her from the beginning. The digital clock on Alicia's laptop blinked 4:37 a.m., as she sat cross-legged on her apartment's hardwood floor. Sticky notes in various colors covered the space around her like fallen autumn leaves, each one bearing hastily scribbled notes and timestamps. A flash drive lay beside her keyboard, containing hours of downloaded security footage and chat logs that made her stomach turn every time she reviewed them. Dark circles shadowed her eyes from a sleepless night spent organizing evidence. The sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen provided a comforting background noise as her roommate Zara moved around, preparing for their early morning task. "You look like you haven't slept at all," Zara said, padding into the living room with 2 steaming mugs. The scent of fresh coffee filled the small space. She handed one to Alicia, who accepted it gratefully. "I haven't," Alicia admitted, taking a careful sip. "But this needs to be done right. We can't miss anything important." Zara settled onto the couch behind her, looking down at the organized chaos of documents. As a podcast host for The Verdict Below, she was used to handling sensitive information, but this was different. This was their own courthouse, their own community. "You sure you want to do this?" Zara asked softly. "Once it's out there." Alicia looked up from her laptop screen, her expression resolute. "It's time," she said simply. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose as she began the careful process of uploading the evidence through encrypted channels. The video footage was damning. Dennis and Mark's mockery of Judge Walker played out in crystal clear detail. Alicia had spent hours selecting the most relevant clips, her legal training helping her identify the moments that would resonate most strongly with the public. The watch list group chat logs were even worse. As she copied selected excerpts, Alicia methodically redacted names while preserving the timestamps and the ugly racial slurs that peppered the conversations. Each message revealed the casual racism that had infected the courthouse like a virus. Zara leaned forward, watching as Alicia worked. "I'll schedule it for noon," she said, pulling up The Verdict Below's publishing platform. Maximum impact during lunch hour. Across town, the East Briar Courthouse was already humming with tension. Judge Nia Walker moved through the building like a quiet storm, meeting with various staff members in her temporary office. Her face remained neutral as she spoke with clerks, administrators, and other courthouse employees, but her mind cataloged every interaction with precision. Some staff members met her gaze directly, speaking freely about their experiences and offering assistance with the audit. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting to the door as if seeking escape. A few were openly hostile, their responses clipped and defensive. In his own chambers, Judge Alton Myers was holding court of a different kind. Several judges had gathered around his mahogany conference table, their coffee growing cold as Myers laid out his strategy. "She's exceeded her authority," Myers said, his polished veneer showing cracks of anger. "This isn't about conducting an audit anymore. She's trying to dismantle our entire system." The other judges murmured in agreement, though a few looked uncertain. Myers continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "We need to present a united front. Walker has gone rogue, letting personal bias cloud her judgment. The Oversight Committee needs to hear this from all of us." Back in her apartment, Alicia watched the clock tick toward noon. Her heart pounded as she refreshed The Verdict Below's website repeatedly. Zara sat beside her, both of them barely breathing as the minutes crawled by. At exactly 12 p.m., the new episode dropped. The headline blazed across their screens. "Black Judge Harassed by Security Guards. Systemic Racism in East Briar Courthouse Exposed." The story spread like wildfire through social media. Local news outlets picked it up within minutes. The video clips of the security guard's behavior toward Judge Walker played on repeat, interspersed with the damning chat logs that revealed years of institutional racism. Within 30 minutes, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters clutching microphones and cameras. Local activists arrived with hastily made signs, their voices rising in unified chants for justice. Citizens from the community gathered in growing numbers, some sharing their own stories of discrimination within the East Briar judicial system. From her office window on the 3rd floor, Judge Nia Walker stood watching the scene unfold below. Her expression remained unreadable as she observed the crowd growing larger by the minute. The afternoon sun cast her shadow long across the office floor, but she stood perfectly still, bearing witness to the beginning of change. Television vans with satellite dishes pulled up to the curb, their reporters jockeying for position. Phones flashed as people recorded the historic moment. The crowd's energy was electric, a mix of anger and hope that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the old courthouse. Inside her office, Judge Walker's phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls, but she remained at the window, silently watching, as East Briar's long hidden truths finally emerged into the light of day. The fluorescent lights of the campus library hummed softly overhead as Samantha Hargrove sat at a corner desk, her phone buzzing insistently beside her laptop. Her father's name flashed across the screen again and again, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Not now. Not after what she'd seen in the news. The library was quiet this early on Thursday morning, with only a few dedicated students scattered among the study carrels. Samantha's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she stared at the login screen for the courthouse email server. As a part-time clerk, she had limited access, but it was enough. Her phone buzzed again. 27 missed calls from her father since yesterday. She turned the phone face down and took a deep breath. The courthouse server loaded, displaying her inbox, but it wasn't her own emails she was interested in. Thanks to her father's careless habit of leaving his work computer logged in during her visits, Samantha knew his password. She'd never used it before, had never wanted to. But now, with her stomach in knots, she entered his credentials. Dennis Hargrove's inbox appeared on screen. Hundreds of unread messages cluttered the interface, but one caught her eye immediately, a forward from Mark Renshaw with no subject line. Her cursor wavered for a moment before she clicked. The image that loaded made her physically recoil. A racist meme, crude and vicious, mocking a black attorney who'd recently argued a case in their courthouse. Mark's message read, "Thought you'd appreciate this one, Dennis. Remember how he tried to act all educated?" Her father's reply, "Good one." Showed it to the boys in the break room. They got a kick out of it. Samantha's hands began to shake. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be her father, the man who'd taught her about justice, who'd encouraged her to pursue law school. But as she scrolled through more emails, the evidence became undeniable. There were dozens of similar exchanges, hundreds, messages mocking defendants based on their race, jokes about keeping the system pure, conversations about which attorneys to hassle at security checkpoints. Each one felt like a physical blow, destroying the idealistic world she'd believed in. One email thread discussed a young black law student who'd been repeatedly stopped and searched despite having proper credentials. Mark had written, "Maybe she'll get the hint and find somewhere else to intern." Her father's response, "That's what I love about you, Mark. Always thinking ahead." Tears blurred Samantha's vision. She thought about her constitutional law textbooks, filled with her hopeful highlighting and margin notes about equality under the law. She thought about the conversations with her father about following in his footsteps, serving the justice system. It had all been a lie. Her hands still trembling, Samantha opened a new tab. The Verdict Below podcast site was still trending, its explosive revelations about the courthouse dominating local news. At the bottom of the article was a secure tip line, an encrypted submission form for those with additional information. Samantha's cursor hovered over the link. In her mind, she heard her father's voice from countless dinner conversations. "Family first, always. We protect our own." But another voice was stronger now, her own conscience screaming for truth. She clicked the link. The submission form was anonymous, designed to protect whistleblowers. Samantha began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard as years of witnessed incidents suddenly gained new context. She listed names, dates, staff rosters. She detailed the unofficial policies she'd observed, the patterns of discrimination she'd previously dismissed. Finally, she attached the email archives, hundreds of messages documenting years of systematic racism within the courthouse walls. Her heart pounded as she hovered over the submit button, addressed to Judge Nia Walker. Across town in the courthouse security office, Dennis Hargrove paced nervously. The media coverage was getting worse by the hour. Local news vans remained parked outside, and social media was exploding with courthouse stories. "Someone's talking," Dennis said, running his hands through his thinning hair. "Someone on the inside is leaking information." Mark Renshaw leaned against the wall, his usual smug expression replaced by something harder. "We've buried this stuff before," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We'll bury it again." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy with implication. Dennis nodded, but his eyes were distant, worried. His phone showed no response from Samantha, the first time in her life she'd gone this long without answering his calls. Back in the library, Samantha took one final look at the screen. Everything she'd gathered was there. Evidence that could tear down the system her father had helped build. Evidence that could destroy his career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for. She thought about family loyalty. She thought about justice. She thought about right and wrong. She clicked submit. That evening, Judge Nia Walker sat in her temporary office, reviewing case files, when a notification appeared on her secure server. A new submission through the tip line. She opened it, noting the anonymous source marker. The message was detailed, professional, clearly from someone with intimate knowledge of the courthouse's inner workings. But it was the attachments that caught her attention. A file titled guardmailarchive.zip. Nia clicked, and her screen filled with emails. 214 of them, to be exact. Each one more damning than the last. Racist jokes, discriminatory policies, coordinated harassment, the casual cruelty of systemic racism laid bare in black and white. She scrolled through message after message, her expression unchanging, but her eyes growing harder with each revelation. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and meticulously documented. Finally, Nia leaned back in her chair, the weight of what she'd just read settling over her. The words came out as barely a whisper, but they filled the quiet office with purpose. This is enough. The Friday morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Nia sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of meticulously organized files. Her computer screen glowed with spreadsheets, names, dates, and case numbers from the watch list cross-referenced against court outcomes. Her eyes moved methodically down the columns, noting patterns and inconsistencies. A name caught her attention. Terrence Boyd, listed as no-show in 2017. She scrolled further, searching for subsequent entries, court dates, rescheduling notices, anything. But there was nothing. Just a blank space where a young man's story should have continued. Nia pulled up Boyd's initial booking record. The photo showed a young black man, barely out of his teens, with clear eyes and a nervous smile. The charge seemed minor. Verbal aggression. No prior record. No indication of violence. Just another young man who'd entered the system and somehow vanished within it. She reached for her phone and dialed Alicia's number. The young intern had proven herself both capable and trustworthy over the past few days. More importantly, she knew the courthouse's archival system inside and out. "Ms. Mensah," Nia said when Alicia answered, her voice calm but urgent. "I need you to look into something. A case from 2017. Terrence Boyd." Alicia sat at her small desk in the intern's corner, already pulling up her computer. "What am I looking for?" "Anything after his initial intake. There's a gap in his records that doesn't make sense." The sun had long since set when Alicia finally made her way to the courthouse archive room. The building was nearly empty, with only the cleaning crew making their rounds. She'd waited until this hour deliberately. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. The archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Metal shelving units stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with manila folders and boxes. Alicia moved through the aisles with purpose, her flashlight beam dancing across file labels until she found the right section. 2017 Intake Records. Boyd's intake form was where it should be, filed chronologically. The paper was crisp, official, everything filled out in neat handwriting. But as Nia had noticed, there was no corresponding release form, no transfer log, no court hearing record. Alicia frowned, holding the intake form closer to her light. There, in the margin, someone had scrawled a note in faded blue ink. Escalated to Holding C. No external report filed. Holding C. The words tugged at her memory. She'd seen references to it in old building plans while researching the courthouse's history for her internship. It was part of the original holding cell complex, but it had been sealed off after what official records called a flood in 2018. Her heart began to beat faster. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. The cleaning crew had finished their rounds. The courthouse was silent now, empty except for the night security guard who always dozed at his desk. Alicia pulled out an old key card she'd borrowed, though borrowed might have been too gentle a word, from a former janitor who'd been sympathetic to her concerns about the courthouse's practices. The card was basic, meant only for maintenance access, but it might be enough. She made her way down to the basement level, past the current holding cells, to a heavy door marked Maintenance Only, Restricted Access. The keycard reader blinked red once, then green. The lock clicked. Inside, the air was stale and damp. Her flashlight revealed peeling paint and water stains on the walls, evidence of the supposed flood. But something felt off about the damage pattern. It looked more like neglect than water damage. Filing cabinets lined one wall, their drawers hanging open, papers spilling out. Above them, security cameras hung limply from their mounts, their wires cut clean rather than damaged by water. Alicia moved deeper into the space, her flashlight beam sweeping across empty cells. The beam caught something in the last cell, a wooden bench bolted to the wall. She stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. Dark stains marred the wood, old stains, deep and ominous. And there, scratched into the underside of the bench where it would have been hidden from casual view, were 2 letters. TB. Alicia's hands shook as she took photos with her phone, documenting everything. The cut camera wires, the suspicious water damage, the stained bench with its desperate scratches. Each click of her camera felt like a small act of justice. Back in her office, Nia stared at Terrence Boyd's intake photo. His face filled her screen. Young, hopeful, alive. Age, 19. Charge, verbal aggression. A minor offense that should have resulted in nothing more than a fine or community service. She opened a new folder on her desktop and named it Wrongful Death Case EB-001. Into it went Boyd's intake photo, his incomplete records, and the photos Alicia had just sent from Holding C. The evidence was building piece by terrible piece. Her cursor blinked over the folder name. East Briar's first official wrongful death case was about to be filed. But Nia knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that it wouldn't be the last. She'd seen too many gaps in the records, too many names that simply vanished from the system. She added Terrence Boyd's name to the case file, the first step in what would become a civil suit that would shake East Briar to its foundations. His story would finally be told, his disappearance explained, and those responsible would face justice in the very courthouse where they'd tried to bury their crimes. The Saturday afternoon sun beat down on the courthouse steps as Nia Walker approached the building. Her measured steps faltered for a moment as she caught sight of fresh black spray paint defacing the weathered brick wall. Black Judge, like Judgment Day. The letters were crude, hastily painted, but the message was clear enough to make her stomach tighten. She adjusted her judicial robe, brushing away a speck of dust with practiced calm, and continued her walk toward the entrance, her chin lifted slightly higher than before. Inside, the usual weekend skeleton crew of security guards avoided her gaze, their eyes finding sudden interest in the floor tiles or distant walls. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting unstable shadows across the marble floor like nervous whispers. Nia's heels clicked steadily as she made her way to her chambers, each step echoing in the tense silence that seemed to follow her like an unwelcome shadow. She settled at her desk, powering up her laptop for another day of investigating East Briar's buried secrets. The screen flickered to life, but instead of her usual login screen, a red warning box appeared. Unauthorized login attempt, location, external. Her expression remained neutral, but her fingers moved swiftly, disconnecting from the wireless network and switching to a secure hardline connection she'd installed earlier that week, a precaution that now seemed eerily prescient. Nia pulled out her encrypted phone and dialed the Oversight Committee's emergency line. "This is Judge Walker," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter of concern in her chest. "We have a breach attempt on the East Briar audit files." The response was immediate. Within minutes, the committee's cybersecurity team confirmed what she'd suspected. Someone had tried to access her case files through a back door in the courthouse's outdated security system. The trace led to a private server registered to Thomas Myers, Judge Alton Myers' nephew, and the courthouse's unofficial IT consultant. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As Nia documented the breach attempt, her phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline made her blood run cold. Local attorney arrested during courthouse protest. Below it was a photo of her brother Jamal, hands cuffed behind his back, being led away by courthouse security. His face showed not fear but defiance, the same expression he'd worn the last time they'd spoken face to face. The article cited an outstanding warrant from 2009 for inciting civil unrest. Nia recognized the tactic immediately. They'd dug up and repurposed an old warrant to silence him. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. This was retaliation, plain and simple. Another message meant for her. She was already pulling up the warrant details when her office door burst open. Judge Alton Myers stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. His tie was slightly askew and a fine sheen of sweat covered his forehead. The polished veneer he maintained was cracking before her eyes. "You've gone too far, Walker," he spat, stepping into her office uninvited. "You come in here, stirring up trouble, weaponizing race to advance your own agenda." Nia's hand moved subtly to her blazer lapel, where a small recording device was pinned, a precaution she'd started taking after the first threats appeared. She remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert, like a chess player who had anticipated her opponent's move. "Judge Myers," she replied evenly, "this is hardly the appropriate way to address a colleague, much less a federal oversight judge." He leaned over her desk, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Step down before you're removed. This is your last warning. You have no idea what you're dealing with here." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," Nia responded, her voice clear and steady as still water. "The question is, do you?" Myers straightened up, adjusting his tie with trembling fingers. "You'll regret this," he said, turning to leave. "Mark my words." The door slammed behind him, leaving Nia alone in her chambers. She waited exactly 30 seconds before reaching for her phone again, her heart beating steady and sure. Hours later, in a secure conference room 3 floors below the main courthouse, Nia sat across from 3 oversight officials who had flown in from D.C. on an emergency flight. The officials, 2 women and 1 man, all wearing expressions of grave concern, listened intently as she played the recording of Myers' threat. The room felt both too small and too large at once. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every word, every nuance of threat in his tone. When it finished, the room fell into heavy silence that seemed to have physical weight. Finally, the senior official, a woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, spoke. "You're not stepping down, Judge Walker." She exchanged glances with her colleagues before continuing. "You're stepping up." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed envelope, sliding it across the table to Nia. The document inside bore the official seal of the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee. The title read, "Appointment to Statewide Oversight Division Lead." Nia's fingers rested on the paper, feeling the weight of both responsibility and vindication in its official letterhead. Thunder rolled across East Briar's darkened sky as Alicia Mensa pulled into the courthouse parking lot at 5:30 a.m. Sunday morning. Rain pelted her windshield in heavy sheets, providing natural cover for her early arrival. She sat in her car for a moment, double-checking her supplies. Latex gloves, a powerful LED flashlight, and a prepaid burner phone with a secure connection to Judge Walker's private server. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands remained steady, a testament to her determination despite her fear. The old service entrance creaked as she slipped inside, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The basement level of the courthouse always felt oppressive, but today the weight of what she might find pressed down on her even harder. The air hung thick with decades of mildew and neglect, making each breath feel heavy in her lungs. Shadows seemed to reach for her from every corner, as if the building itself wanted to keep its secrets. Alicia's hand trembled slightly as she swiped her borrowed keycard at the entrance to Holding C. The lock clicked, and she pushed through into darkness. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, revealing peeling paint and water stains tracking down the walls like tears. The cold, damp air raised goosebumps along her arms as she moved deeper into the forgotten space. The holding area was a time capsule of institutional decay. Metal chairs with restraint attachments sat rusting in corners, their leather straps cracked and molding. Alicia documented everything methodically, her burner phone capturing image after image. Each photo told part of a story that had been buried for years. She tried not to think about the people who had suffered here, focusing instead on the evidence that would bring them justice. She moved deeper into the space, sweeping her light across surfaces marked by time and secrets. Water-damaged logbooks lay scattered on a desk, their pages warped but still legible. Alicia photographed every page, noting the abrupt end to entries in late 2017, right around when Terrence Boyd would have been processed. Her throat tightened as she recognized the significance of this gap in the records. The beam of her flashlight caught something on a holding cell bench, scratches in the metal. Alicia knelt closer, her gloved fingers tracing the crude letters. TB. Her throat tightened as she photographed the initials, knowing they were likely the last mark Terrence Boyd ever made. A wave of sadness washed over her as she imagined his final moments in this cold, forgotten place. Behind a rusted filing cabinet pushed against the wall, something caught her eye. A clear plastic bag, the kind used for cataloging inmates' personal property. Despite years of dust, the label was still readable. Boyd, Terrence J. Item hold. Her breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, the only sound was the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. With trembling hands, Alicia carefully opened the sealed bag. Inside, she found a small pocket Bible, its pages dog-eared and worn from frequent reading. Beneath it lay a gray hoodie, its fabric stiff with dark brown stains that could only be blood. She photographed everything in place before carefully resealing the bag as evidence. The reality of what happened here was no longer just theory. It was tangible, undeniable proof in her gloved hands. Opening the secure messaging app on her burner phone, Alicia uploaded all the photos to Judge Walker's private server. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing a single devastating line. He never left. They never even logged him out. She sent the message, knowing these words would change lives forever, including her own. Across town, in her home office, Nia Walker was already awake and working on the wrongful death filing. Her computer pinged with Alicia's incoming evidence. As she reviewed the photos, her composed expression cracked slightly. The physical proof made the horror of what happened in Holding C undeniable. Her normally steady hands paused over the keyboard as she absorbed the full weight of what they'd discovered. She reached for her phone and dialed a number she'd memorized days ago. After 3 rings, a woman's voice answered, thick with sleep but instantly alert. "Mrs. Boyd, this is Judge Nia Walker." She paused, gathering strength for what came next. "I need to talk to you about Terrence." "Terrence?" The woman's voice wavered. "But he ran away. That's what they told me. Said he escaped custody and just disappeared." "Mrs. Boyd, I'm so sorry." Nia's voice remained steady even as her hand gripped the desk. "But that's not what happened. We've found evidence, physical evidence, that Terrence never left the courthouse." The silence on the other end of the line broke into a raw, keening sound, the cry of a mother learning her worst fears were true. Nia waited, letting Mrs. Boyd's grief flow. When the sobs quieted to shaky breaths, Nia continued gently. "We're filing a wrongful death suit today. We have proof of what they did, and what they covered up. I promise you we're going to get justice for Terrence." After finishing the call, Nia added the newly documented physical evidence to her legal filing. The Bible, the hoodie, the logbooks. Each piece helped build an irrefutable case of institutional corruption and cover-up. Her fingers moved with purpose across the keyboard, transforming tragedy into legal action that might finally bring accountability. Later that afternoon, as storm clouds still hung low over East Briar, Nia walked out of the courthouse. The rain had settled into a steady drizzle, matching the somber weight of the day's discoveries. She moved purposefully toward her car, her heels clicking against wet pavement. Her mind was already mapping out their next steps, the legal strategy taking shape with each stride. From several steps away, she spotted something fluttering on her windshield. A torn piece of newspaper had been secured under her wiper blade, its edges dripping in the rain. As she drew closer, she saw crude red letters scrawled across the newsprint. "Tread lighter, Walker." The message sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the damp weather. Without changing her pace or expression, Nia calmly removed the paper from her windshield. She kept walking, her posture straight and dignified, though her eyes scanned the parking lot with heightened awareness. The threat was clear, but so was her resolve. She wouldn't be intimidated away from justice. Someone was watching from the shadows, but Nia Walker had spent her entire career standing in the light, and she wasn't about to step back now. The Monday morning sun cast long shadows across the nearly empty diner on the outskirts of East Briar. The bell above the door chimed softly as Samantha Hargrove entered, her hood pulled low over her face and dark sunglasses hiding her eyes. She scanned the quiet establishment, noting only 2 other customers, an elderly couple absorbed in their breakfast near the window. In the farthest booth, Judge Nia Walker sat alone, a steaming cup of coffee untouched before her. She watched carefully as Samantha approached, noting the young woman's nervous energy in the way she gripped her messenger bag. Samantha slid into the booth, keeping her head down. A tired-looking waitress approached with a menu, but Samantha just ordered tea in a whispered voice that trembled slightly. Once the waitress moved away, she reached into her bag with shaking hands. "I need you to understand something," Samantha said, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled out a small USB drive, its black surface unmarked. With careful movements, she slid it across the table's worn surface. "My dad's in deeper than you think." Nia didn't reach for the drive immediately. Instead, she studied Samantha's face, or what she could see of it beneath the disguise. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she asked quietly. Samantha nodded, wrapping her hands around the newly arrived cup of tea. "I have to. What they did, what they're still doing. Someone has to stop it." Nia carefully picked up the USB drive and secured it in an inner pocket of her blazer. "Tell me what's on it." "Everything," Samantha said, her voice cracking. "Chat logs between my dad, Mark, and the other guards. They thought it was funny, what they were doing. They'd joke about planting contraband on people. Black people, mostly. They had this whole system worked out." The waitress passed by their booth again, and both women fell silent until she was out of earshot. Samantha leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "They would deliberately slow-walk certain defendants to court, trying to make them late. They wanted them to get angry, to cause disruptions. Then they could claim they were being unruly." Nia's expression remained composed, but her eyes hardened. "Is there anything specific about Terrence Boyd's case?" Samantha nodded, her hands tightening around her cup. "There's an email thread about the security cameras. They talked about adjusting the angles, making sure certain areas weren't visible." She swallowed hard. But that's not the worst part. She glanced around the diner again before continuing. "My dad, he used to brag sometimes when he'd been drinking. He talked about something called the Ghost Protocol. It was their unofficial way of making certain defendants disappear before their court dates." Her voice shook. "I never believed him. I thought he was just talking big, trying to sound important. But now you know better," Nia finished softly. "There's more on the drive," Samantha said. "Names, dates, everything I could find. I've been collecting it ever since I saw that first email about the racial slurs. I couldn't believe my dad could be part of something like this." Meanwhile, across town in the courthouse security office, Dennis Hargrove paced between filing cabinets, his face flushed with anger. "They're just gone," he snapped, slamming a drawer shut. 3 years of security reports, completely wiped from the shared servers. Mark Renshaw sat at his computer, frantically clicking through folders. "Maybe IT did a purge? Sometimes they clear old files dash." "Without telling us?" Dennis cut him off. "During an investigation? Don't be stupid." He leaned over Mark's shoulder, pointing at the screen. "Check the access logs. Someone's been in our system. Mark's fingers moved across the keyboard, but his face had gone pale. Dennis, maybe we should just what? Dennis growled. Roll over? Let that black judge destroy everything we've built here? He straightened up, running a hand through his thinning hair. Go talk to Jimmy in IT. Find out who's been accessing our files. I can't, Mark said, his voice tight. Jimmy's not answering my calls. And yesterday, I saw him talking to one of the federal observers. He turned to face Dennis. Someone's feeding her information. Someone who knows where to look. Dennis slammed his fist against the wall, making Mark jump. Find out who it is, he ordered, before everything comes apart. Later that evening, Samantha returned home, her heart still racing from her meeting with Judge Walker. The house was dark as she unlocked the front door, but she could smell whiskey in the air, her father's preferred drink when he was worried. She found him sitting in the living room, no lights on except the dim glow from a street lamp filtering through the curtains. He didn't move as she entered, didn't speak, just sat there in his armchair, a glass dangling from his fingers. Dad? She said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Why are you sitting in the dark? He took a long moment to answer, and when he did, his voice was unnaturally calm. You been talking to that black judge? Samantha felt her heart skip a beat, but she forced herself to sound casual. What? No, of course not. She set her bag down slowly, making sure the USB drive's hiding place wasn't visible. Why would you think that? Dennis didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her through the darkness, his face half hidden in shadow. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken accusations. Finally, he took another sip of whiskey and spoke in a quiet, dangerous voice. Stay out of it, Sam. For your own good. Samantha nodded, her face carefully blank even as she felt something harden inside her. Okay, Dad, she said softly. The Tuesday morning sun had barely risen when Judge Nia Walker entered the East Briar Courthouse through a side entrance. 4 members of the Federal Oversight Committee, dressed in plain business attire, followed her silently. They carried standard-issue briefcases that concealed their true purpose beneath mundane paperwork and office supplies. Remember, Nia said softly as they gathered in her chambers, we're conducting routine internal audits, payroll discrepancies, and case scheduling reviews. She spread several folders across her desk, creating a convincing display of ordinary administrative work. Nothing that would raise suspicion. Agent Sarah Chen, posing as a clerk from accounting, nodded as she adjusted her fake employee badge. We've created complete audit trails and documentation. Everything looks standard procedure. 2 other agents, Tom Martinez and David Powell, dressed as IT support staff, reviewed the courthouse layout on their tablets. The guard station's primary computer hub is here. Martinez pointed to a spot on the digital blueprint. We can install the monitoring software while running a routine system update. The 4th agent, Lisa Morgan, straightened her conservative blazer. I'll handle the physical wiretaps during my facilities inspection. The maintenance chief already approved the access. Nia checked her watch. The morning shift starts in 15 minutes. Dennis and Mark always arrive early to review the overnight logs. She looked at each agent in turn. Be careful. They're paranoid and watching everything. The team dispersed, moving through the building with practiced casualness. Martinez and Powell headed to the security office, their tools disguised in standard IT equipment bags. Morning, Martinez called out cheerfully to Dennis and Mark. Just doing some system updates, shouldn't take more than an hour. Dennis grunted, barely looking up from his morning coffee. Mark shifted nervously in his chair but said nothing as the 2 technicians began working on their computers. In another part of the building, Agent Morgan methodically made her way through her inspection checklist, placing tiny monitoring devices in strategic locations around the guard station. Her clipboard and official-looking forms deflected any curiosity from passing staff. By mid-morning, the surveillance network was fully operational. In a secure room 3 floors above, Agent Chen monitored the incoming feeds. Just before lunch, the first significant conversation crackled through the speakers. We need to check Shelf 9, Dennis's voice came through clearly. Make sure everything's wiped clean. Already did, Mark replied, his voice lower. But that footage from Terrence? You sure we got all of it? Had to. We formatted the whole drive after, a pause. Besides, no one's looking for some troublemaker who disappeared 5 years ago. Chen immediately flagged the conversation and sent a secure alert to Nia's phone. Meanwhile, in the judicial wing, Judge Alton Myers sat in his chambers, carefully crafting an internal petition to the State Judicial Board. His fingers moved deliberately across his keyboard as he composed his argument for Nia's suspension. Judge Walker has demonstrated clear bias and conduct unbecoming of her position, he wrote. Her baseless accusations and aggressive investigation tactics have created a hostile work environment and undermined the integrity of this court. He attached supporting documents, carefully selected and edited to support his narrative, and sent the petition through official channels. A satisfied smile crossed his face as he hit send. But within an hour, Nia's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Board member James Richardson, the same person who had quietly appointed her to this investigation, had forwarded Myers's petition with a simple note, "Let him hang himself." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows when Eddie Martinez, one of the building's longtime janitors, made his routine trash collection rounds. As he passed Agent Powell, who was still maintaining his IT auditor cover, Martinez smoothly passed him a small flash drive, the exchange hidden by the movement of emptying a wastebasket. Powell waited 20 minutes before casually making his way back to the secure room where Chen monitored the surveillance feeds. "You need to see this," he said quietly, handing her the drive. Chen plugged the drive into a secure laptop. The video quality was grainy but clear enough. Terrence Boyd, barely 19, being forced into a holding cell. Dennis and 2 other guards followed him in. What happened next made Chen's face go pale. The footage showed Terrence being violently restrained, his protests growing weaker as the guards pressed him down. No medical personnel were present. No proper restraint procedures were followed. The timestamps continued rolling as Terrence's struggles became more desperate, then increasingly feeble. Chen immediately initiated the protocol to transfer the footage to Nia's secure office system. As the day drew to a close, Nia sat alone in her chambers, her face illuminated by the glow of her monitor. She watched the footage in complete silence, her expression unchanging, as the brutal scene unfolded before her. The timestamp in the corner ticked away as Terrence gasped for breath on the screen. His movements grew weaker until finally they stopped altogether. The guards stepped back. Dennis turned toward the camera, his face clearly visible in the harsh cell lighting. Without hesitation, he reached up and pulled the plug. The screen went black. Nia sat perfectly still for a long moment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "This is it." The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows across the East Briar courthouse steps as federal agents secured the perimeter. Yellow tape stretched across the main entrance, and uniformed officers stood at strategic points around the building. Inside, the usually bustling halls were eerily quiet, with only the occasional echo of official footsteps breaking the silence. Special Agent Chen stationed herself at the security desk, methodically collecting badges from arriving employees. "The building is under federal lockdown," she explained repeatedly, her voice firm but professional. "All court proceedings are suspended until further notice." In the administrative wing, 4 identical manila envelopes waited on a desk, each bearing the federal seal and marked, "Urgent, Notice to Appear." The names were typed in bold black letters: Dennis Hargrove, Mark Renshaw, Thomas Fuller, and James Wilson. Outside, a growing line of media vans created a semicircle around the courthouse steps. News crews adjusted their equipment while reporters checked their phones for updates, their breath visible in the cold morning air. The story had gone national overnight. At precisely 10 a.m., Judge Nia Walker emerged from the courthouse doors. She wore her judicial robes and carried a leather portfolio, her steps measured and deliberate as she approached the podium that had been set up on the courthouse steps. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, and microphones extended toward her like reaching fingers. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I am Judge Nia Walker of the Federal Oversight Committee, Today I am announcing formal legal action regarding systemic misconduct within the East Briar courthouse system. She opened her portfolio and continued with precise detail. We are filing a wrongful death lawsuit in the case of Terrence Boyd, age 19, who died while in custody in 2017. This death was deliberately concealed through tampering with official records, destruction of evidence, and coordinated deception by multiple courthouse employees. The reporters scribbled furiously as Naya listed the violations: racial profiling in security protocols, deliberate manipulation of court schedules based on defendant's race, unauthorized use of physical force, falsification of official documents, destruction of surveillance footage, conspiracy to obstruct justice. A murmur rippled through the crowd as phones began buzzing with breaking news alerts. Nia noticed the shift but continued without pause. Criminal charges are pending against multiple individuals. The investigation remains active and ongoing. In the back of the crowd, partially hidden behind a stone pillar, stood Jamal Walker. He had been released just 30 minutes earlier, his clothes still wrinkled from his time in holding. The outdated warrant that had led to his arrest had been reviewed by federal authorities and deemed unconstitutional, a relic of the very system his sister was now dismantling. Jamal watched Nia intently as she fielded questions from reporters. Her responses were measured, authoritative, and uncompromising, everything he had once accused her of not being. When she glanced in his direction, their eyes met across the sea of cameras and microphones. Neither smiled, but they exchanged slight nods, a silent acknowledgement of shared purpose, if not yet reconciliation. Inside the courthouse, Samantha Hargrove sat at her father's old computer terminal. She had arrived early, using his login credentials one final time. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard as she compiled years of data into a comprehensive spreadsheet. Every racially motivated incident report, every suspicious person notification, every random security check that had targeted people of color, all meticulously documented with dates, times, and outcomes. 6 years of systematic discrimination laid bare in columns and rows. Samantha's hands trembled slightly as she attached the file to an email addressed to Judge Walker. In the subject line, she typed 5 words: "This can't be who we are." She hit send, then removed her father's security badge from around her neck and placed it on the desk. She wouldn't be needing it anymore. The day's tensions slowly eased as darkness fell over East Briar. Most of the media vans had departed, leaving behind only their tire tracks in the courthouse lawn. Naya had returned to her temporary home, exchanging her judicial robes for comfortable clothes and warming her hands around a cup of chamomile tea. The knock on her door came just as she was reviewing the day's developments. Through the peephole, she saw Alicia Mensah standing on her porch, clutching a thick file folder to her chest. Her expression was urgent. Nia opened the door, noting the young intern's tense posture. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Alicia entered quickly, placing the file on Nia's kitchen table. The label read, "Probation Quota Initiative, Private Prison Partnership Agreement." She opened it, revealing dozens of pages of contracts, emails, and financial records. "The guards weren't acting alone," Alicia explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "There was a formal agreement between East Briar Court and Riverside Private Corrections. The courthouse had quotas to meet. Minimum numbers of probation violations and new incarcerations. They were getting kickbacks for every person sent to Riverside." Nia's expression remained composed, but her eyes narrowed as she examined the documents. The corruption went deeper than individual prejudice. It was institutionalized, monetized, and deliberately hidden behind layers of bureaucracy. "Then we keep going," Nia said simply, her voice carrying the weight of renewed purpose. Thursday morning arrived with a chill that seeped through the windows of Nia's rental home, making her pull her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper that told a story of systematic exploitation and human suffering. The Probation Quota Initiative agreement lay spread before her, its pages forming a complex web of corruption that connected East Briar Courthouse to Rutherford Correctional Group, like an intricate spider's web of injustice. Steam rose from her untouched coffee as she methodically arranged the documents, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The contract's language was deliberately dense, buried in legal terminology and bureaucratic jargon meant to confuse and mislead. But its purpose was crystal clear to her trained eye. The private prison contractor had established a pay-for-prisoners scheme with the courthouse. For every defendant sentenced to extended terms, for every probation violation that led to incarceration, Rutherford paid out bonuses to the court like some perverse commission structure. Nia's fingers traced the columns of numbers, quarterly targets, escalating quotas, performance metrics that reduced human lives to profit margins and dollar signs. Her stomach tightened as she examined the agreement that detailed specific bonus structures, additional payments for sentences exceeding recommended guidelines, incentives for probation revocations, and special considerations for what they euphemistically called high-occupancy maintenance, a sanitized term for keeping cells filled at all costs. Alicia arrived at 8, carrying her laptop and a fresh stack of files, her footsteps quick and determined. The young intern had barely slept, her eyes showing the strain of hours spent diving through digital archives, yet there was an unmistakable fire of purpose in her gaze. Together, they began mapping the document's approval chain, following the electronic signature trail through various departments and authorization levels like detectives tracking footprints at a crime scene. "Look at this," Alicia said, pulling up a digital verification log, her voice quiet but intense. Each signature has a unique timestamp and authorization code. They can't deny their involvement. Nia leaned in, watching as Alicia navigated through the system with remarkable efficiency. The signatures appeared one by one: departmental heads, administrative officers, judicial representatives. Then, a familiar name emerged: Judge Alton Myers's electronic signature, complete with his personal authorization code, standing out like a confession in plain sight. "Wait," Nia said, her voice tightening as she placed a hand on Alicia's arm. "Go back to that page." Alicia reversed the screen with a quick tap. There it was, not just Myers's signature, but the approvals of 2 retired judges as well, their names carrying the weight of institutional authority. The document had been authorized at the highest levels of the court, creating an official veneer for what amounted to human trafficking disguised as justice. Further down the contract, they found a specific line item that caught their attention: performance-based risk enforcement, an allocation of funds directed to the security department. The amount was substantial, explaining the guards' aggressive targeting of minority defendants with painful clarity. They weren't just acting on personal prejudice. They were incentivized to feed the system like hunters paid by the capture. They built in rewards for the security staff, Alicia noted, her voice bitter with the realization. The more people they flagged as high risk, the more money they made. It's like they created a bounty system. Nia was about to respond when a knock at the door interrupted them. 3 sharp raps that broke her concentration. One of the federal oversight agents, Agent Martinez, entered with an urgent expression, his normally composed face lined with concern. He carried a tablet displaying multiple news feeds that flickered with breaking headlines. "Judge Walker," he said, "we have a situation. Judge Myers is making moves at the state level. He's moving faster than we anticipated." The tablet showed various headlines, all variations on the same theme. Senior judge challenges federal overreach in local court. East Briar judge claims racial bias in federal audit. State hearing called to review federal authority. Each one twisted the narrative in Myers's favor. Myers had called for an emergency state hearing, challenging the federal authority to oversee the court's operations. His legal team was pushing a narrative that painted Nia as an activist judge, abusing her position to pursue a personal agenda, undermining her credibility before she could present her findings. "He submitted evidence," Martinez continued, scrolling through documents with a grim expression. "Edited versions of your private emails from the past few weeks. They were compromised during the cyber breach we detected but couldn't fully contain." Nia examined the excerpts, her heart sinking. Her words had been carefully selected and removed from context, making her legitimate concerns about systemic racism appear as predetermined bias. Myers was trying to discredit her personally to protect the larger system and everyone involved in it. The weight of the day settled heavily as evening approached, darkening both the sky and Nia's thoughts. She drove through familiar streets to an old diner on the edge of town, Joe's Place, a modest establishment where she and Jamal had spent countless hours with their father years ago, before everything fell apart. The neon sign flickered weakly in the gathering darkness, a faded beacon from a simpler time. Jamal was already there, seated in their old booth by the window, his silhouette instantly recognizable to her. He wore a dark sweater and looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered, but his eyes were clear and focused with the same intensity they'd had since childhood. A slice of apple pie sat untouched before him, their father's favorite, a small gesture that spoke volumes about his willingness to reconnect. Nia slid into the opposite seat, placing the probation quota document on the table between them like a bridge across their years of separation. For several moments, neither spoke. The familiar sounds of the diner, clinking plates, murmured conversations, the soft hum of the overhead fans, filled the silence between them, a comforting backdrop to an uncomfortable reunion. Finally, Nia tapped the document with her index finger. "They were selling time," she said simply, her voice carrying years of accumulated pain and understanding, the 3 words encapsulating the entire corrupt scheme. Jamal studied the papers, his expression hardening as he absorbed the details of the scheme, his jaw clenching visibly. After a long moment, he looked up at his sister, their eyes meeting in perfect understanding. "They still are," he responded, the words heavy with shared knowledge of ongoing injustice and the battles still ahead. The siblings sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by memories of simpler times, while before them lay evidence of the system they were both fighting, from different angles, but with the same goal that had always united them beneath their differences. The apple pie remained untouched, a silent witness to their renewed connection in the face of revealed truth and shared purpose. The marble floors of the state capitol's hearing chamber gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights that Friday morning. Judge Alton Myers sat before the state judicial panel, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression carefully crafted to convey wounded dignity. He wore his most expensive charcoal suit and his Stanford Law School tie pin, carefully chosen props for his performance of injured authority. "What we're witnessing here," Myers declared to the panel of 7 senior judges, his voice carrying the practiced resonance of decades in courtrooms, "is nothing short of a politically motivated witch hunt." Judge Walker arrived in East Briar with clear preconceptions and a divisive agenda. He shuffled through his prepared notes, though he hardly needed them. Every pause, every gesture had been rehearsed to project sincerity and gravitas. The panel members watched with varying degrees of attention as Myers continued his testimony. "Her investigation has created unnecessary racial tensions in our community," he continued, straightening his tie. "She's undermined the public's faith in our judicial system through unsubstantiated allegations and unauthorized federal overreach." Myers gestured to a stack of documents beside him, carefully edited excerpts from Nia's emails. "As you can see from these communications, Judge Walker's bias was evident from the start. She came to East Briar looking for racism, determined to find it regardless of facts." Several panel members nodded, their faces showing the expected concern of colleagues hearing about potential misconduct. Myers allowed himself a small internal smile. The narrative was landing exactly as he'd planned. But then the chamber doors opened. Oversight Agent Delia Cho strode in carrying a slim laptop and an external hard drive. Her dark suit and badge caught the light as she moved purposefully toward the witness table. Myers' smile faltered slightly as she set up her equipment. "Members of the panel," Cho began, her voice clear and professional, "I'm here to present evidence gathered during our federal investigation of East Briar Courthouse." She connected her laptop to the room's projection system without waiting for permission. Myers shifted in his seat, his collar suddenly feeling tight. "I object to this unexpected interruption of my testimony." "Overruled," stated Chief Judge Martinez, the panel head. "Agent Cho, proceed." The lights dimmed, the projector hummed to life. And then, on the massive screen behind Myers, the unedited security footage from Holding Cell C began to play. The timestamp showed clearly, 2:17 a.m. June 15, 2017. Terrence Boyd, barely 19, was being forcibly restrained by 3 guards. Their faces were clearly visible. The audio was crystal clear, including Boyd's increasingly desperate gasps for air, the guards' racist commentary, and finally, the terrible moment of stillness. The panel watched in horror as Dennis turned to the camera and unplugged it. But before the feed went dark, another figure appeared briefly in the frame. Judge Alton Myers himself, standing in the doorway of the holding cell. Cho paused the footage. This evidence was recovered from a secure server designated Shelf 9. We also have documentation showing Judge Myers personally authorized the deletion of this footage from official records, approved false transfer papers, and coordinated with private prison contractors to hide Mr. Boyd's death. She began methodically displaying supporting documents, emails, authorizations, financial records. Each one connected Myers directly to the cover-up and to broader violations of judicial ethics codes. The marble chamber erupted into chaos. Panel members began talking over each other. Reporters in the gallery rushed for their phones. Myers stood abruptly, his face ashen, and moved toward the exit. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward from their positions by the door, blocking his path. "Judge Myers," one said firmly, "please return to your seat." Across town, in a modest apartment complex, Nia Walker sat with Mrs. Patricia Boyd, Terrence's mother. The small living room was filled with photos of Terrence, as a child at his high school graduation, playing basketball. His smile was bright in every image. "The federal investigation has uncovered definitive evidence about what happened to Terrence," Nia explained gently. "We're moving forward with both criminal charges and civil proceedings against those responsible." Mrs. Boyd nodded slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was a small woman, worn by years of uncertainty and grief, but her eyes held steady strength. "Thank you," she said softly. "All these years, not knowing, thinking maybe he'd just run away somewhere." She stood and walked to a shelf, picking up a framed photo of Terrence in his cap and gown. "But what about the others?" she asked, turning back to Nia. "What happens to the others they disappeared?" Because Terrence wasn't the only one. People talk, mothers know. The question hung heavy in the air, weighted with years of community knowledge and unspoken fears. Nia felt its gravity, understood the responsibility it carried. Later that night, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day, Nia returned to her rental house. The porch light cast weak yellow circles on the welcome mat. As she reached for her keys, she noticed something. A plain white envelope slid partly under her front door. Inside was a single USB drive. No note, no markings. She took it to her laptop and plugged it in, scanning it first for viruses or malware. The drive contained just one folder, labeled simply, "Ghost Cases, 14 Unresolved Names." The folder opened to reveal a grid of mugshots, 14 faces, mostly young, mostly black or Hispanic. Below each photo was a name, a date of entry into East Briar Courthouse, and a note indicating no recorded exit. No transfer papers, no release documents. Just people who had entered the system and never emerged. The files had no metadata to trace their source, no digital fingerprints to follow. Just 14 stories waiting to be uncovered. 14 families still waiting for answers. Nia stared at the faces on her screen, each one representing another thread in the tangled web of corruption she was unraveling. The magnitude of what she'd stumbled into at East Briar was still revealing itself, one layer at a time. The law library sat silent and empty that Saturday morning, its towering shelves casting long shadows in the early light. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams that filtered through tall windows, giving the space an almost ethereal quality. In a secluded corner, surrounded by stacks of files and 3 laptops, Nia Walker, Alicia Mensa, and Samantha Hargrove huddled around a large oak table. The smell of old books and furniture polish hung in the air, creating that distinctive library atmosphere that felt both comforting and solemn. Nia spread out the 14 case files from the mysterious USB drive, arranging them chronologically. Each folder contained a mugshot, intake forms, and incomplete processing documents. The faces stared up at them, young men whose stories had been erased from the system. Their eyes seemed to plead silently from the photographs, asking for someone to finally acknowledge their existence. "Let's start with the earliest case and work forward," Nia said, her voice barely above a whisper despite the empty library. "We need to reconstruct their final documented days." Her fingers traced the edge of the first folder, as if making a silent promise to the young man whose face looked back at her. Alicia nodded, opening her laptop to access the courthouse's digital archives. The blue glow illuminated her determined face as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Samantha, still struggling with her role in exposing her father's involvement, began sorting through physical copies of guard duty rosters she'd quietly collected over the past week. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the papers in neat stacks. "Here's Jerome Washington, 2014, Alicia said, pulling up his file. "Arrested for jaywalking, held overnight, then nothing. No release papers, no transfer documents." She frowned, leaning closer to her screen. It's like he just vanished into thin air. They worked methodically through each case, creating detailed timelines. Samantha cross-referenced guard schedules, while Alicia dug through digital records. Nia took meticulous notes, looking for patterns and connections. The quiet scratching of her pen against paper punctuated the silence of the library. When they reached the file for Marcos Jimenez, something clicked. His case stood out immediately, a 2015 loitering charge that should have resulted in nothing more than a fine. Instead, he'd been held for probation processing and then vanished from all records. The inconsistency was glaring, like a red flag waving in their faces. "Look at this," Samantha said, her voice tight. "Mark signed off on Jimenez's holding report. It's the last official document in his file." Her face paled as she recognized the familiar signature, a connection to her father's world that made her stomach knot. Nia leaned forward, studying the signature. "And the probation order? Who authorized that?" Her eyes narrowed as she already suspected the answer. "Judge Myers," Alicia confirmed, pulling up the digital record. "But the processing paperwork is incomplete. It's like they started the documentation and just stopped halfway through." She tapped the screen with her fingernail, highlighting the abrupt end to the paper trail. They continued working, and another name jumped out: Tariq Banks. At just 17, he'd been arrested for sitting in his parked car after curfew. The intake log showed him entering the holding area, but there was no record of him ever leaving. His young face in the mugshot showed confusion and fear, a boy caught in a system far bigger than himself. "The pattern is impossible to ignore," Nia said, standing to pace the narrow space between bookshelves. "Young men, black and Latino, minor offenses or no prior records at all." Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved, her shoulders tense with the burden of their discovery. Samantha pulled up a spreadsheet she'd been building. "And look at this. Most of these cases happened right around the time the private prison contract was being renewed. The timing can't be coincidental." She turned her laptop so the others could see the damning timeline she'd created, dates highlighted in angry red. While they worked, Alicia's phone buzzed. A text from a contact she'd been cultivating, James Chen, a former IT contractor who'd worked at the courthouse for 3 months in 2016 before suddenly quitting. She held her breath as she read the message, hope blooming in her chest. "He's willing to talk," Alicia said, looking up from her phone. "Now. He says he has something we need to see." Her voice quivered with excitement and nervousness. 30 minutes later, they met Chen in a coffee shop 2 towns over. He was nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out an external hard drive. The cafe buzzed with weekend patrons, providing perfect cover for their hushed conversation. "I knew something wasn't right," he explained in hushed tones. "They kept having me delete specific case files, always saying it was for system maintenance or processing quotas. But the patterns were weird, so I started keeping backups." His eyes darted around the room as if expecting someone to be watching them. He slid the drive across the table, just in case someone ever started asking the right questions. His fingers lingered on the device for a moment before he pulled away, passing the burden of knowledge to them. Back at the library, they plugged in Chen's drive. It contained shadow copies of deleted files, system logs, and, most importantly, original processing documents that had been deliberately erased from the main courthouse servers. The evidence was like finding the missing pieces to a puzzle they'd been struggling to complete. "Look at these timestamps," Alicia said, pointing to her screen. Files were being systematically deleted, usually late at night or early morning. And the deletion logs, They're all tied to terminal access from the guard station. Her voice grew more confident with each revelation. They spent hours cross-referencing the new data against their 14 ghost cases. Each missing person's file showed the same pattern: irregular processing, incomplete documentation, and strategic deletion of digital records. The sun shifted across the library floor as they worked, shadows lengthening as afternoon wore on. By late afternoon, the evidence was overwhelming. All 14 cases showed no legitimate discharge, no proper release papers, no transfer documents, no final processing. Just people who had entered the system and disappeared. The weight of this truth settled heavily over the three women. Nia sat back in her chair, the weight of what they'd uncovered visible in her expression. "They never had a chance," she whispered, her voice heavy with the realization. The system was rigged against them from the moment they walked through those doors. Her normally composed face showed a flash of raw pain. She opened her laptop one final time, composing a new email to the Department of Justice. She attached their compiled evidence, the original ghost cases, Chen's recovered files, their analysis of patterns and connections, and the documented irregularities in processing. Her fingers moved deliberately, making sure every critical piece was included. In the subject line, she typed, "Request for Federal Criminal Investigation, East Briar Courthouse." Her finger hovered over the send button for just a moment before pressing down firmly. The email disappeared into cyberspace, carrying with it the hopes of 14 families still waiting for answers about their loved ones. The simple click seemed to echo in the quiet library, the sound of a first step toward justice. The Sunday morning dawned clear and crisp over East Briar, but the usual weekend quiet was shattered by the steady hum of gathering crowds. News vans lined the courthouse perimeter, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal flowers. Reporters clutched microphones and tablets, their voices creating a constant murmur as they delivered live updates to viewers across the nation. The Verdict Below's special episode had dropped at midnight, a comprehensive breakdown of the 14 ghost cases that had vanished within East Briar's walls. Within hours, the story had exploded across every major network. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all ran different angles of the same devastating revelation. 14 lives had disappeared into a system designed to swallow them whole. By 9 a.m., the courthouse steps were packed with people holding candles and photos of the missing. The silent vigil had been organized overnight by local civil rights groups, but its reach had extended far beyond East Briar's borders. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, their silence more powerful than any shout could have been. Many held signs bearing the names and faces of the ghost cases: Terrence Boyd, Marcos Jimenez, Tariq Banks, and 11 others whose stories were finally being told. Inside her office, Nia Walker watched the gathering crowd through her window. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn, calls from national news outlets, civil rights attorneys, and families of the missing. She left them all unanswered. The evidence would speak for itself now. At precisely 10:30 a.m., the Department of Justice made its announcement. The press conference in Washington, D.C. was brief but decisive. A full federal investigation would be launched into East Briar Courthouse, examining patterns of racial profiling, fabricated charges, and the systematic disappearance of detainees. The arrest of Dennis Hargrove and Mark Renshaw came less than an hour later. Federal agents led them out in handcuffs through the courthouse's main entrance, the same doors where they had once mocked and threatened Nia. News cameras captured their every step. "We were following protocol," Dennis shouted as he was led to a waiting vehicle. "Everything we did was approved. Ask Myers." But the evidence told a different story. Federal investigators had already uncovered dozens of encrypted messages between the guards and representatives from Rutherford Correctional Group. Regular deposits into offshore accounts matched perfectly with the dates of disappeared defendants. Their protocol had been nothing more than a cover for systematic human trafficking into private prisons. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse lawn, Jamal Walker took his place at a hastily assembled podium. The crowd fell even more silent, if that was possible. He carried something in his hands, a faded gray hoodie in an evidence bag. "I'm not here to name names," he began, his voice steady and clear in the autumn air. "I'm not here to point fingers or demand vengeance. I'm here because this belonged to a kid named Terrence Boyd." He held up the hoodie, its bloodstains visible even through the plastic. This belonged to a kid who was supposed to walk free, a kid who should have gone home to his mama that night. Instead, he became a number in a system that saw him as nothing but profit. The crowd remained silent, but tears flowed freely down many faces. Some held up their candles higher, the flames steady in the still air. Inside the courthouse, Nia sat at her desk reading a final memo from the Oversight Committee. The official letterhead bore the state seal, and the words below it would change not just her future, but the future of justice in their state. Effective immediately, Judge Nia Walker is hereby appointed to the position of Director of Statewide Judicial Reform, with full authority and jurisdiction to audit and oversee reform measures in all state courthouses. She read it twice, letting the weight of the responsibility settle over her. This wasn't just about East Briar anymore. This was about changing the system itself. As evening fell and the crowd slowly dispersed, Nia walked through the empty courthouse halls one last time. Her footsteps echoed against marble floors that had seen too many innocent people led to unjust fates. She entered the main courtroom, Courtroom 1, where so many of the ghost cases had begun their journey into darkness. The room was silent, heavy with the weight of its own history. Nia walked slowly to the judge's bench, her hand trailing along the polished wood. This seat of power had been used to destroy lives instead of protecting them. She placed her palm flat against the surface, feeling the smooth finish under her skin, then stepped down. Outside, the vigil had dwindled to a single protester, an elderly woman who knelt on the courthouse steps. She carefully arranged a framed photo of Terrence Boyd, his young face smiling out at the world that had failed him. With trembling hands, she lit a single candle and placed it before his image. The flame wavered for a moment in the evening breeze, dancing like it might go out. Then it steadied, burning bright and strong in the gathering dusk, a small light against the darkness that had lived too long in these halls. The Monday morning air held a bitter chill as Nia Walker stepped through the entrance of East Briar Courthouse one final time. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through empty corridors that had once bustled with activity. Now, the building stood as a hollow shell of its former self. Courtrooms dark and silent, clerk stations abandoned, security posts unmanned. Yellow police tape crossed several doorways, marking areas still under federal investigation. Signs on office doors read, "Sealed, DOJ investigation in progress." The place carried the heavy atmosphere of a crime scene, which, Nia reflected, was exactly what it had become. She paused at the security checkpoint where Dennis and Mark had once mocked her. The metal detector stood unplugged, its screen dark. A discarded visitor badge lay on the floor, forgotten in the chaos of evacuation. The building didn't just feel physically abandoned. Its moral abandonment was palpable in every shadowed corner and empty hall. By mid-morning, Nia met with the DOJ forensics team in what had once been Judge Myers's chambers. Laptops and hard drives covered every surface, cables snaking across the floor like digital vines. Special Agent Torres, a seasoned investigator with tired eyes, gestured her over to a monitor. "We recovered this from a corrupted drive," he said quietly. "You should see it." The footage was grainy but clear enough. A young black teen, Tariq Banks, stood in a holding cell, his hands pressed against the glass. His voice came through scratchy but distinct. "Please, somebody help. I need my medicine." The timestamp showed him calling out for nearly an hour while guards walked past, some laughing, others simply ignoring him. The video ended abruptly. Nia watched without expression, though her hands gripped the back of the chair until her knuckles whitened. When it finished, she silently took the stack of affidavits Torres offered. Each one would help declare a missing person legally deceased, giving families the closure they'd been denied for years. Her signature felt heavy as she moved through the documents. Each stroke of her pen represented another life lost to systemic cruelty, another family destroyed by institutional racism disguised as justice. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Nia drove to meet with Mrs. Boyd, Terrence's mother. They sat in the woman's modest living room, where photos of Terrence covered the walls, him as a baby at his high school graduation, playing basketball with friends. All the moments that should have been followed by countless others, but weren't. Mrs. Boyd listened quietly as Nia explained the wrongful death case status. The civil suit was proceeding, criminal charges were being filed, and the evidence was overwhelming. Justice was coming, but it couldn't bring back her son. With trembling hands, Mrs. Boyd reached for a framed photo of Terrence, his smile bright and alive, and pressed it into Nia's hands. "Don't let this just be a story," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't let them turn my boy into just another headline." Nia held the photo carefully, looking into Terrence's young face. "It won't be," she promised. "This is going to change things, really change them." Across town in a federal courthouse, Samantha Hargrove sat before a grand jury. Her voice was steady as she detailed the toxic culture within the East Briar Security Department, the racist training methods, the deliberate provocation of defendants, the systematic cover-ups of misconduct. "We were taught that some lives mattered less than others," she testified. "Not explicitly, but in every decision, every protocol, every unofficial procedure. My father, ... She paused, gathering strength. "My father was a key enforcer of these practices." When asked if she wanted to testify anonymously, Samantha straightened in her chair. "No," she said firmly. "I want my name on record. My father taught me the rules of the system. Judge Walker taught me when to break them." As evening approached, Nia parked her car across from the courthouse. A large crane had been positioned in front of the building, its arm extended toward the metal nameplate that had hung there for decades. Workers in safety vests guided the crane's movements as the sign was slowly lowered to the ground. Below, a group of volunteers had gathered on the front steps. Alicia Mensah stood among them, roller in hand, helping to apply fresh paint over the worn stone. The new color seemed to glow in the setting sun, a symbolic washing away of the building's dark history. Nia's phone buzzed with an incoming call, the governor's office. She answered, listening as her appointment was officially confirmed, Chief Oversight Officer for Statewide Judicial Reform. The position would give her authority to audit and reform every courthouse in the state, to prevent another East Briar from happening anywhere else. She watched as the old nameplate touched the ground, its tarnished letters no longer casting shadows over the entrance. The volunteers continued painting, their brushstrokes steady and determined. Each one represented a small act of reclamation, of hope, of change. 2 months after the fall of East Briar Courthouse, morning light streamed through the tall windows of the State Oversight Office's main courtroom. The space bore little resemblance to the dark wood and brass fixtures of traditional courts. Instead, glass walls and modern furnishings created an atmosphere of transparency and accessibility. 17 young judicial investigators sat in a semicircle, their faces reflecting the diversity that the old system had lacked. Among them was Alicia Mensah, her law school hoodie standing out among the business attire. The silver badge clipped to her belt caught the light as she leaned forward, pen poised over her notebook. Judge Nia Walker stood before them, her presence commanding but approachable. Gone was the formal black robe. She wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of authority without intimidation. Her eyes moved across the faces before her, seeing in each one the potential for change. "What you do here doesn't fix the past," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "But it prevents the next family from burying a loved one without answers." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of Terrence Boyd's memory and the 14 other lives lost to systemic indifference. Later that morning in the main conference room, Nia unveiled the comprehensive statewide judicial review policy. Large screens displayed the key points as she walked the team through each element. The mandatory bias audits would occur every 18 months with no exceptions. Independent ethics panels would include civilian oversight, ensuring community representation in the monitoring process. The Case Integrity Unit drew particular attention, a dedicated team focused solely on investigating wrongful convictions and ghost cases. Alicia's hand shot up when Nia mentioned they were still selecting lead investigators. Her eyes shone with determination, remembering the long nights spent uncovering East Briar's buried truths. The ban on private prison incentive contracts struck at the heart of the old system's corruption. As Naya explained the immediate termination of all such agreements, several investigators exchanged knowing looks. They had all studied the Rutherford Correctional Group case, how money had turned justice into a commodity. Across town at Martin Luther King Jr. High School, Jamal Walker addressed a packed auditorium. His presentation on civil rights and judicial accountability held students spellbound. When he mentioned his sister, Judge Walker, to the audience, his voice carried a new warmth, though still tinged with old pain. Their joint educational campaign had taken them to dozens of schools. Each time they shared the stage, the distance between them shrank slightly. They weren't yet back to the easy closeness of childhood, but their shared mission had created a bridge across years of estrangement. In her small apartment, Samantha Hargrove opened an email from Harvard Law School. Her hands trembled as she read the acceptance letter, tears blurring her vision. Her essay, The Bench and the Door, had detailed her journey from blind loyalty to moral awakening. The admissions committee had specifically praised her courage in confronting systemic injustice, even when it meant standing against her own father. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as Dennis Hargrove and Mark Renshaw were led in for their arraignment. Their orange jumpsuits stood in stark contrast to the suits worn by their co-defendants, former executives from Rutherford Correctional. Dennis kept his eyes down, avoiding his daughter's gaze as she sat in the gallery, watching justice take its course. On a crisp afternoon, hundreds gathered at the former East Briar Courthouse grounds for the memorial service. 14 granite markers formed a circle, each bearing a name and dates that spoke of lives cut short. In the center, a larger stone carried Terrence Boyd's image and the words, "Remember their names." The families sat together, united in grief and validation. Mrs. Boyd clutched Tariq Banks's mother's hand as official apologies were read. The restitution checks couldn't restore what was lost, but they acknowledged the system's debt to these families. As dusk settled over the city, Nia's car pulled up to the cleared lot where East Briar Courthouse once stood. Construction equipment sat silent, waiting to begin work on the new Civic Center. The ground had been leveled, erasing all physical traces of the building that had housed so much injustice. She stepped out into the cool evening air, carrying a single framed photograph. The image showed Terrence Boyd at 19, wearing his favorite hoodie, his smile bright with youth and possibility. She walked to the edge of the lot, where temporary fencing marked the boundary of the future construction site. Carefully, she placed the photo against the fence. The last rays of sunlight caught Terrence's face, making his smile seem to glow. Nia stood for a moment, her silhouette strong against the darkening sky. "Justice isn't the verdict," her voice carried on the evening air as she turned to leave. "It's the refusal to look away when the system forgets who it serves." Her footsteps echoed as she walked back to her car, the empty lot behind her waiting for its new purpose, while Terrence's photo stood guard over the ground where truth had finally emerged from shadow. If you enjoyed the story of Judge Walker, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.